Josef Mengele. He wasn't just a Nazi officer, he was a doctor, he was educated, he was well respected, and he was also one of the greatest monsters of all of World War II. At Auschwitz, he decided life or death with just the flick of a finger. He hunted twins like they were some type of trophy, and he would cut them open and perform unthinkable experiments. To him, they weren't children, they were just experiments. He even showed up on his days off, not for duty, but for more victims. He was a war hero, he got medals, he was a doctor with PhDs, but he is ultimately the man who turned science into horror. This is the Angel of Death. So, sit back and welcome to camp. What's up, people, and welcome back to camp. My name is Mark Gagnon, and thank you for joining me in my tent, where every single week we explore the most interesting, fascinating, controversial stories from around the world ever. As always, I'm joined by my dear friend Christos Papadopoulos. What's up, Christos?
What's up, Cam?
All right, you know what? We don't have time because today we're diving into World War II history, specifically one of the more morbid and dark elements of it. And there are many, and this is one of the top. Josef Mengele, also known as Josef Mengele. And he's one of the more disturbing characters that you'll ever read about in a history book. I mean, truly, he was a doctor. He came from a good family, and he became a Nazi. And sure, a lot of people became Nazis, but he was, particularly brutal, particularly twisted, and perhaps was, just a proper serial killer psychopath who happened to have the right credentials at the wrong time. So we're going to dive into his entire story, uncover his motivation, what he did, and why he did it. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? Mengele was born March 1911 in this little Bavarian town known as Günzburg. And his family was pretty successful. They owned one of the largest businesses in all of Günzburg, Karl Mengele and Sons. And they made farming equipment. Think like John Deere, but it was German and super successful. His father, Karl Mengele Sr., built this company from nothing into a massive operation. And this is right around the time that, industrialization is like really sweeping through Germany. It's one of the most industrialized nations. And these guys, the Mengele family really capitalized. I mean, like threshing machines, plows, all that kind of stuff. Everything that a farmer in the region, specifically in Bavaria, would need. And by the time that Josef was growing up, the Mengeles were one of the wealthiest families in all of Bavaria. I mean, he had everything going for him, right? He was smart, came from money, parents who cared about him. He was an excellent student. Like, he didn't just do well in school. He goes overboard with the degrees. I mean, he gets a PhD in anthropology when he's 23. And then he decides to go and get a medical degree along with it. So by the mid-1930s, he's, young guy with multiple doctorates, and this is where things start to get a little weird. So for his dissertation, he's studying jaw measurements and how they supposedly determine race. Yeah, it's like a thing. Basically, more or less, like there's, an antiquated version of pseudoscience that, basically tries to understand, racial science. It tries to understand the race of a person or the IQ of a person based off of different features about their physiology. And this specific dissertation was trying to tell someone's ethnicity by measuring their chin. You are a white dude, but we measure your chin. Actually, turns out you're Asian the whole time. That kind of stuff. And this is the kind of thinking that is, very much wrapped into the Aryan Nazi philosophy. So by 1937, he joins the Nazi Party, and in 1938, he signs up for the SS. Now, just to clarify, the Nazi Party is the official political party, while the SS is the enforcer of the ideology held up by the Nazi Party. They're essentially the militia, the security force for the Nazis, more or less. That's the simple version. And it's not like he needs the job security, right? Josef was already working at this prestigious research institute in Frankfurt under Ottmar Führer von Schauer, who was one of the leading voices in Nazi racial science. And Ottmar specialized in twin studies and racial hygiene, which will eventually have a massive influence on, Josef Mengele. So by now, his career's taken off, and he's got respect in academic circles, and everything's going great. Then World War II officially kicks off, and Mengele gets drafted as a medical officer. He serves on the Russian front, gets wounded, and then receives decorations for bravery. So now he's not just Dr. Mengele, he's Dr. War Hero Mengele with a shiny iron cross on his chest. And this is where the story takes maybe the most horrific turn of all. By 1943, somebody in the SS looks at Mengele's file and thinks, this guy is great. He's a brilliant doctor. He's obsessed with genetics and racial purity, and he's a war hero, and he's a part of the Nazi party. Let's get him at Auschwitz. So, by May of 1943, Mengele steps off the train at Auschwitz and is looking like he's headed to, a country club. He's got like a clean uniform. He's got his polished boots. And the guy sees his place, and his first thought isn't horror. He's like, oh, this is a great opportunity. This is unlimited human subjects, no ethics committee, no paperwork, no one asking me questions about what I can and can't do. This is so much better than the university setting that I was working in before. This is free range. And his main job, on paper was standing on the selection ramp waiting for the cars to show up and basically pointing left or right. Now, if he points left, you go to work in the camps, and if he points right, then you go to the chambers. This is specifically the gas chambers for mass extermination. And Mengele making these life or death decisions for thousands of people every single day. I mean, talk about a God complex, right? Survivors remember him always wearing like pristine white gloves and carrying like this little riding crop, kind of like a little like whip. And even sometimes like humming like Brahms or Beethoven while he's literally deciding who lives and who dies. And most of the other SS doctors, they hated selections. They called it the worst part of their job, and they tried to get out of it whenever possible, right? Like, it would make them feel uncomfortable, make them feel badly about what they're doing. Even the Nazis, people literally committing, the worst atrocities against humankind, are looking at this and they go, I don't like that part of the job. But Mengele would even show up on his days off. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He would scan the crowds looking for very specific people. Twins, people with strange or unusual eye colors, anyone who might benefit his specific research. So, now that we know that this accomplished doctor with 2 PhDs and a war medal ended up deciding who lives and who dies of, potentially thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, what did he do to these so-called patients, which were obviously not patients at all? And why is it so far beyond anything that his PhDs could have ever taught him? Emergency broadcast. We have a brand new channel, and that is Mark Gagged on Comedy. If you don't know, I've been a stand-up comedian for almost 10 years now, and it is my true passion. I love doing it, and every time I go on the road, after I finish my show, I like to hear from the audience. We pass out note cards, and people submit topics, and me, and sometimes my buddy, or sometimes just me alone, we will pick the topics out, and it is a segment that we call You Asked for This, and they are crazy. The topics go across the board, current events to crazy stories, and we dive into all of them. And if you are interested in checking out the episodes, it would really help me out and help out the channel. You can check it out in the description. It is Mark Gagged on Comedy on YouTube, and I'm so excited to be posting more stand-up, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. So, Mengele gets his selection routine down, but that is just kind of like the day job, right? That's just the paperwork. What he really wants to do is the research, and Auschwitz gives him something that no legitimate scientist could ever get. Unlimited subjects with zero oversight. So he sets up his own private lab and starts collecting twins. Not just a few pairs here and there. There's about 1,500 sets of twins, about 3,000 children total, and most of them were small children, not like 20, 25 years old. And the fucked up part is that the twin kids lived almost better than other people at the camp in Auschwitz. I mean, they got better food, they got clean clothes, they got to, keep their hair even though everyone else's hair got shaved. Ava Moses Kor, a survivor and a twin from Auschwitz, confirmed that they were housed in separate twins' barracks that had, better offerings than some of the other prisoners. Why is this? This isn't because Mengele had like a soft spot for, these kids. He needed healthy specimens. This is how sadistic and twisted he is. He wanted these people to be in good condition so that he could actually perform experiments on them. And you can't get good research data from malnourished, sick children. So he kept them fed and clean and healthy. This wasn't kindness. This was like a quality control. It was it was basically a way for him to control the subjects that he was getting. Now, the daily routine was always the same. Children were, subjected to blood draws and, height measurements and weight and head circumference, and they were photographed, and they were basically trying to document every tiny little physical detail. And injections were given regularly, often with substances that were never identified to any of the patients. I mean, the children themselves had no understanding of what was even happening to them. And this is what made it so disturbing, is that Mengele was genuinely good with these kids. He had a good bedside manner, probably something that he learned in, medical school, and he had a soft voice, and he would bring toys and candy. Miss Ava, who I described before, said basically this exact thing. She says, he would bring chocolate and sweets and stroke our hair, and then the next moment he would send us to the lab to be injected with germs. I mean, like psychopath shit, like crazy. And he was so nice to the kids outside of the experiments. They would run up to him calling him Uncle Mengele, and he was like a friend of theirs. He would ruffle their hair and smile at him. Vera Kreigel, a Czechoslovakian twin survivor, called him the smiling angel of death, someone who made the twins feel special for a moment only to put them into these horrific tests. And from the outside, he looked like a nice doctor trying to help. But here's the thing. The survivors understood something that the kids didn't. This special treatment came with a price. Jonah Locks, a Polish twin survivor, put it perfectly, basically saying that twins were considered Mengele's property, which basically means that guards couldn't beat them or kill them or, mistreat them like they could the other prisoners. She said that, this gave them a warped sense of safety, but it also came with the constant terror of, we're being saved for something much worse. But that caring doctor routine was just a setup, right? His real interest was this comparative anatomy. He wanted to see how identical twins were the same on the inside and how they would compare to each other. So he would take twins to his lab and inject chloroform into them, kill them, and then he would then perform autopsies to compare their organs. I mean, truly sadistic, evil shit. And then the preserved organs, or whatever else he would then get shipped to research institutes inside of Germany. The prisoner doctor Miklos Neisli, who was forced to assist with these autopsies, later wrote about watching Mengele kill 14 twins in one night, just going child to child, injecting them one after another like it was an assembly line. Now, here's what we need to do in order to separate some fact from fiction. You may have heard stories about him, sewing twins together or, trying to create conjoined twins, but some historians dispute that this had ever happened. Not to downplay, obviously, the severity of what Mengele did, but just in the interest of authenticity. The Auschwitz Museum calls it a myth. So where did this come from? Probably from some survivors that were seeing twins connected with tubes and needles during blood transfusions. So Mengele would take blood from one twin and put it into the other, often without checking any type of compatibility, which of course would kill many kids on their own. Now, what actually happened was bad enough without having to, go to the myth world. And sometimes he would even infect one twin with typhus just to see how the other one would react, and surgeries were carried out without anesthesia. I mean, truly awful. And the really sick part, Mengele kept detailed records of everything, charts, graphs, measurements, photographs. To him, again, these weren't kids, they weren't human beings, they were data. And the data collection was complete, that data would get disposed of. So by the time the Soviets started closing in on Auschwitz in early 1945, Mengele had gone through those 1,500 sets of twins. Most didn't survive, and the few that did would spend the rest of their lives dealing with the physical and psychological damage from these experiments. Now, of course, this Mengele and his obsession with genetics didn't stop with twins. He also had another fixation that was equally as disturbing. It was human eyes. You see, he was fascinated with heterochromia, which is people that have two different color eyes. They might have one that's blue, one that's brown. And he would collect prisoners who had this condition like they were like trading cards. But what really got him excited was the idea of changing brown eyes to blue eyes, because in his twisted Nazi worldview, blue eyes were superior. So he started experimenting, injecting chemicals directly into kids' eyes, trying to alter the eye color. And the procedures were brutal and excruciating, and above all, they didn't work. So Mengele wasn't the type to give up. So when he couldn't change the eye color, he would instead try to harvest eyes, and we would kill the people in Auschwitz and take their eyes. And the Auschwitz archives still have detailed drawings of the eye color variations. And this isn't some disturbing legend. This is actually documented. This guy actually kept like jars of human eyes in his lab shelves and shipped them to research institutes around Germany. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because you need better sleep. I mean, if you're like me, you'll probably wake up feeling exhausted. You miss your workout. You're drinking too much coffee. You feel wired the whole day because you're just shocking your nervous system. And the problem is that sometimes you don't sleep great, and the sleep supplements that you do take are probably packed with melatonin, oftentimes 10 times the melatonin that your body actually produces. So as a result, you end up feeling more groggy and worse than you did before because this melatonin is knocking you out and you're not able to wake up easily. It's a big problem. And that's why sleep dust came into the market, because they saw this issue, and instead of knocking you out with massive doses of melatonin, it works with your body using 5 clinically backed all-natural ingredients. That includes magnesium glycinate, which is amazing for sleep. I take it every single night, L-theanine, glycine, and a microdose of melatonin that actually matches what your body makes. So as a result, you fall asleep faster, you sleep deeper, and you wake up refreshed and ready to crush your day. Sleep dust is third-party tested, contains no sugar, artificial ingredients, and it's made right here in the US of A. They are so confident that it will work for you and it'll help you sleep that they offer free shipping, and they back it with a 60-day money-back guarantee. Now, I love this because all of these things are amazing. I'm already taking magnesium glycinate. I'm already taking L-theanine. And I mean, sure, you could buy all of these supplements independently, or you could save money and time just by getting sleep dust. So if you are curious, you can go to www.sleep-dust.com. That is sleep-dust.com. And you can use the code SLEEP for 20% off. That is sleep-dust.com. Use the code SLEEP for 20% off. And look, if you don't like it, you got a 60-day money-back guarantee. That is how confident they are. So go check them out. And thank you so much for supporting the show. We got the link in the description. Now let's get back to it. Now, Mengele is obviously twisted and disturbed, as we've seen, and his, fixation on twins and, eye experiments was just part of his job. It's, some of his main work was actually as a chief physician of the Roma family camp. Now, this is about 23,000 Roma prisoners living in their own section of Auschwitz. Now, something that a lot of people don't realize is that Auschwitz wasn't just a single camp. You have Auschwitz I, which is the original camp built in the 1940s, and this was the administrative center of the entire complex, and it was many Polish prisoners. And then you have Auschwitz II, which is the Birkenau. This is the largest section. It was built in 1941, just a few kilometers away. And this was the massive concentration camp that had many of the extermination sites. And then you have Auschwitz III, Monowitz, which was established in 1942, which is primarily a labor camp where prisoners were, effectively forced to work. Many of them working for IG Farben, which is a chemical company. We actually did an episode about this and how IG Farben actually became a proper company that still exists to this day. I did it with David de Jong in his book, Nazi Billionaires. Regardless. But beyond these three, there was more than 40 smaller subcamps that were spread across the region where prisoners were forced into labor for various industries. And the Roma camp was a part of Auschwitz II Birkenau, where this section was different from other parts of Auschwitz. So some families got to stay together. Some kids would be put in different barracks, and they were even given access to some personal belongings. And they were trying to keep some semblance of normalcy because the Nazis wanted to make it look like the model resettlement camp if the Red Cross decided to come snooping around. But by August 1944, the Nazis decided they didn't need to keep up the illusion, right? They were fully on lockdown and fully committed to their genocidal regime. So on August 2nd, orders came down to basically get rid of the entire Roma family camp. And that night, the SS guards forced 3,000 men, women, and children into the gas chambers at crematoria 4 and 5. And what's crazy, even more disturbing than this, is that the Roma had actually resisted a separate extermination attempt by using makeshift weapons from hammers and shovels and basically tried to form their own rebellion. But this time, there was no escape. And by dawn, the barracks that once held thousands were completely empty, and the entire Roma camp was officially marked as closed the very next day. Now, I think at this point, we've well established that Josef Mengele is a true monster, and beyond even, by Nazi standards, but a, legitimate and proper sociopath, psychopath, and, probably a serial killer that happened to, get into a regime where he could kill with impunity. But there are even more stories that are more disturbing. One is the Ovitz family, which, for the sake of this episode not getting demonetized, I will only go through some of the details. But in 1944, an entire family rolled into one of the camps, and it was the Ovitz. And they weren't just any prisoners, they were Jewish entertainers, and they were actually going across Europe to entertain people, and 7 of them happened to be dwarves. The rest were about average height, but Mengele saw this as the perfect lottery. There was a genetic mix of different people, of different unique genetic specifications, and what does he decide to do? He pulls them out of the regular barracks and gives them special treatment and does everything from hot water, cold water tests to dripping chemicals into their eyes. I mean, all sorts of brutal and atrocious things that I will save for you to look up on your own. And survivors from the family even claimed that taller family members were forced to carry the dwarf family members back and forth so that the entire family basically became props in this weird genetic study. And maybe the darkest part of this entire chapter is that Mengele supposedly even filmed the Ovitzes during these experiments and torture, although nobody has ever found the footage. And by early 1945, the Soviet army was closing in on Auschwitz, and Mengele knew the camp would eventually fall. But rather than facing trial, he slipped away, beginning a manhunt that would captivate the world for decades. So, it's January 1945, and Mengele knows the jig is up. So he packed up his specimens and his research notes and abandons Auschwitz altogether. But here is where the story gets extremely frustrating. American forces capture him. They've literally got one of the worst war criminals ever in history in their custody, and they don't know who he is. And why is this? Because most SS officers had their blood type tattooed on their chest or arm, but Mengele never got the tattoo when he joined the SS back in 1938. So the Americans are holding this random German officer who claims that he was just like a regular doctor that was trying to help people. And they check his arms and his chest, and they don't see any SS tattoo. And they assume that he must be just like a POW or, someone that was like a low-ranking, doctor's assistant. They don't really know who he is. And after 2 months in custody, they just let him go. Just like that, the Auschwitz angel of death, as he was called, walks free because he didn't have a tattoo or a way to clearly identify him. So Mengele spends the next 4 years underground in Germany, working as a farmhand near Rosheim in Bavaria, and basically just trying to stay invisible, right? He saw, many of his other Nazi compatriots get either executed or, killed themselves, or flee ultimately or go to prison. And he thought, maybe if I just lay low, I can avoid any type of punishment. And his wealthy family is back in Günzburg, and they knew exactly where he is, but they're not talking. They're just waiting for, all this heat to die down. And he even uses aliases like Fritz Hollmann to keep himself off the radar. But in 1949, everything changes. With help from his family money and some connections, he's able to escape through German rat lines into Italy. And Mengele gets fake papers, and he boards a ship from Genoa to Argentina under the name Helmut Gregor. These are the same rat lines that smuggle thousands of Nazis out of Europe, and just like that, he's gone and into South America, where hundreds of ex-Nazis are now building new lives. Now, here's the crazy part. In Argentina from 1949 to 1959, Mengele isn't hiding in like a jungle hideout. The guy is living openly in Buenos Aires and working at a pharmaceutical company owned by his friend. And it gets even crazier. In 1958, he married his brother Karl's widow, Martha Mengele, under his real name, Josef Mengele. The wedding announcement even ran in the local newspaper. That's how confident he was that nobody was coming for him. But in 1959, things are getting uncomfortable in Argentina. You see, President Juan Perón, who had welcomed many of the Nazis with open arms, was overthrown in 1955, and their new leader, Pedro Aramburu, wasn't nearly as friendly to the ex-Nazi officials. Suddenly, there are too many questions, too many Nazi hunters nosing around in Buenos Aires, so Mengele sells the shares of his farm and moves to Paraguay, buying citizenship under the name Jose Mengele. Again, not even trying. Paraguay is the perfect place because the dictator Alfredo Stroessner is a guy who's happy to protect fugitive Nazis as long as they got some money. So by the 1960s, things get really interesting. Mossad agents, literally the Israeli secret intelligence, are now in Buenos Aires planning the Eichmann operation. You see, Adolf Eichmann is the guy who basically organized the logistics of the Holocaust, and he also slipped out of Europe after the war. And honestly, this needs its own episode, so I'll do a deep dive on that on a different day. But here's what matters for this. These agents knew that Mengele was in Buenos Aires too. They've got his address. They confirmed that he's living in the city, but they've only got 11 agents total, and they're already stretched thin with the Eichmann plan. Rafi Eitan, the Mossad agent in charge, later admitted that they had to make a choice. Take both Eichmann and Mengele and risk losing both, or focus on Eichmann and guarantee that they at least get one major war criminal. So they choose Eichmann, and in May 11th of 1960, Mossad snatched Adolf Eichmann off the streets and smuggled him back to Israel for trial. But by the time they came back from Mengele, he was gone. But in 1961, Mengele relocated to Brazil under the identity of a man named Wolfgang Gherhard. Here, he ends up living with the Bossert family, Wolfram and Lissolette Bossert, who were both Nazi sympathizers and friends near Sao Paulo. They were Austrians who became his main protectors for the next 18 years. While he was with them, he would also use another alias, Peter Hochbichler, just to keep things layered and even more confusing. They know exactly who he is and what he's done, and they don't really care. Now, one of the things that a lot of people look past is that this isn't some guy in the jungle, barely surviving, hiding out. He's living well. He's going to beach resorts. He's on the sand. He's sipping drinks and, is checking over his shoulder occasionally, but he's not really that paranoid that someone's just going to sweep him off the streets. Meanwhile, the rest of the world thinks that he's like hiding in a cave and, he's emaciated and barely getting by. Nope. He's, at a beach club and enjoying life. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because I got to tell you a story. Imagine you're sitting in your house. It's cold outside. It's a little snowy. And you're like, man, I just want a panini. So you go and you order it, from DoorDash or something like that. And it never gets to you. You're looking at the app. You're like, dude, it's been 4 hours. Where's my panini? You're calling. No one answers. Well, this is a true story that happened. There was a woman, a client, that was working as a DoorDash driver, and she slipped and fell on an icy walkway outside of a Panera Bread in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She breaks her elbow, which leads to surgery and hardware having to get inserted into her arm. She can't work. And originally, she sues Panera, and Panera's like, okay, we'll give you like $125,000. But then the good people over at Morgan & Morgan fought for her and got her the $1 million verdict that she deserved. Yes. If you've never heard of them, Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. Yes, and they are that way for a reason. They've been fighting for the people for over 35 years. Now, I'll be honest, if I ordered, a panini and the woman gets paid $1 million because she slipped, it's a tragic thing to happen, of course, but I deserve a little bit of that. I should get a cut at least, right? I'm the one that ordered the panini. If I never ordered that panini, she never would have slipped, never got $1 million, which obviously she deserved. You know what I mean? But maybe next time she gets $1 million and $1.1 million, I can get a cool $100,000 out of that. Regardless, all I'm saying is if you're ever injured and you are looking to get the money that you deserved, the compensation that is entitled to you from your injuries, Morgan & Morgan could be the way to go. Hiring the wrong law firm can be disastrous. You can be locked up in litigation. It's a nightmare. But hiring the right law firm could substantially increase your settlement. And with Morgan & Morgan, it's easy to get started. Their fee is $0 unless they win. That's right. Their fee is free unless they win your case. You don't pay you pay 0 cents unless they win your case. You can visit forthepeople.com/Gagnon, Gagnon. That is forthepeople.com/Gagnon, or dial #law. That's #529 from your cell phone. That's forthepeople.com/Gagnon, or click the link in the description below. And thank you so much to the good folks over at Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this program and making this show possible with this paid advertisement. Well, let's get back to the show. Until 1971. When Wolfgang Gherhard, the real Wolfgang Gherhard, the man whose identity that Mengele had basically been borrowing, dies. But what does Mengele do? The guy whose identity he's stealing in order to keep his cover is now gone. He keeps using the name anyway as if nothing ever happened. And this just shows how convinced he was that he would never be caught. A year after this, in 1972, Mengele's own son, Rolf, visits him in Brazil to confront him about his time at Auschwitz. And this part is crazy. When Rolf finally confronts his father, Mengele tells him straight up, I can't feel guilty. I was doing my duty. I don't have any regrets. No remorse, no apology, not even trying to justify or rationalize it to his own son. Just ice-cold justification for mass murder. You see, at this time, by the 70s, it's a lot more clear what exactly was happening in sort of the fog of war. It wasn't exactly clear to everyone around the world what the atrocities were exactly at Auschwitz and the other concentration camps. No one exactly knew. By this time, in the 70s, it was being taught in history books, and people were much more aware of the evils that had occurred in Nazi Germany. So, for 34 years, from 1945 to 1979, Josef Mengele lived as a free man. No Nuremberg trials, no handcuffs, no justice, just a retirement funded by, his family's farm equipment fortune and sheltered by Nazi sympathizers. But even the best disappearing acts eventually come to an end, and Mengele's ending is about as anticlimactic as you can get. So, February 7th, 1979, Josef Mengele is doing what he's been doing for years. He's living the good life in Brazil. He's 67 years old, staying with the Bossert family at their vacation home in Bertioga, which is just like an hour from Sao Paulo. And Mengele goes for his usual swim in the ocean, and then something goes right. He has a stroke while in the water, and he drowns. Just like that. God had to take him. Hashem himself. No dramatic shootout with, Nazi hunters or Mossad or a trial. Just a man who tortured thousands of people, many of them children, dies in a pretty innocuous way. But here's where it gets interesting. The Bosserts are now panicking, the family that housed him, because they know exactly who died in their care, and they know what that means. If the Brazilian authorities figure out that Josef Mengele just died and that they were the ones that were keeping him, this is going to raise a lot of questions about what's been going on in their home and in Brazil at large. So they make the decision to basically confuse the hell out of everyone for the next 13 years. They bury Mengele at the Embu Cemetery outside Sao Paulo under this name, Wolfgang Gherhard. Remember, that's the identity that he's been using even after the real Wolfgang died in 1971. So as far as the official records show, some quiet Austrian expat named Wolfgang Gherhard died of natural causes. No one bats an eye. But here's the problem. The Bosserts and a few other people know the truth, but they're keeping their mouths shut. Meanwhile, the rest of the world has no idea that the most wanted Nazi just became a corpse rotting in Brazilian soil. So what happens next is comically tragic. For the next 6 years, from 79 to 85, the international manhunt for Josef Mengele continues. Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal are following up on leads, and Mossad is spending resources to track him down. Governments are offering rewards, and survivors are hoping to see him face trial and get justice. Just a little bit of justice, if there is any. And the whole time, Mengele is gone. But oddly enough, there are reported sightings everywhere. People swear that they see him in Paraguay, Chile, in Europe, in the United States, and every few months, some newspaper runs a story about how Mengele, the evil doctor, may be hiding in the jungle. I mean, books get written about it, TV documentaries speculate where he may be. This is international news that one of the most prominent and evil Nazis is still on the loose. And he becomes almost a mythical figure, right? This Nazi that got away. But in May of 1985, German investigators made a breakthrough. They raided the house of Hans Sedlmayr, a longtime friend of the Mengele family in Günzburg. And that is where they hit the jackpot. Sedlmayr's house is full of letters and documents on financial records that prove the Mengele family had been sending Josef finances for decades. More importantly, the documents point to Brazil. Specific addresses, contact information, the protectors, the whole network that basically kept him safe. And so the government got to work. June of 1985, Brazilian police got the news of these findings from the Germans. So they headed to the cemetery outside Sao Paulo and they start digging into the burial records. But things don't add up. So they make the decision to exhume the body. And on June 6th, they dig up Wolfgang Gherhard's grave, and what they find is a skeleton that doesn't match the official records for Gherhard. Wrong height, wrong age, wrong dental work. Basically, all the remains they find show that this is not Wolfgang Gherhard. So they call in an expert. An international team of forensic specialists travel to Sao Paulo to examine every bone and tooth and evidence that they can find. And what they found shocked everyone. The dental records and the skull measurements and the height are a perfect match for Josef Mengele. Sort of ironic that a guy that dedicated the early part of his career to measuring skulls is now having his own skull measured to prove that he's really the guy that's dead. 2 months after the discovery, the team announces this conclusion that this is Josef Mengele, who had died 6 years before and nobody knew. Now, you would think that that would close the case, but it doesn't. If anything, the announcement sparked more controversy. You see, survivors, Nazi hunters, even some in the government didn't believe it. After decades of him slipping through the cracks, the idea that he drowned in a swimming accident was just way too anticlimactic and way too convenient. And remember, this is the 80s. DNA testing still isn't a standard tool, so all investigators can do is rely on the traditional forensic methods, right? They can match dental records, but that's kind of it. And the match looks strong, but the skeptics aren't convinced. And this is until 1992 that the final word came down. By then, DNA testing had advanced enough to answer the question once and for all, and scientists take genetic samples from the bones and compare them to Rolf Mengele, Josef's only son, and the results are undeniable. the DNA matches, and it proves that the skeleton in that grave is Josef Mengele. After the DNA results come in, the case is closed, and the Mengele story should have ended, but once again, it doesn't. His skeleton gets buried again. It didn't get locked away in some government vault. Instead, his bones are kept in Sao Paulo Forensic Institute, and for years after, medical students use his skeleton as a teaching tool, and not in a glorifying way. They literally just studied him. He had a fractured left pelvis, which they were able to link to a motorcycle accident he had in Auschwitz. There was a small hole in his left cheekbone related to long-term sinusitis, and he had signs of dental abscesses, which he allegedly treated himself by cutting them with razor blades. So, in the end, the so-called Angel of Death literally became an anatomy lesson himself. Sort of a dark ending that is maybe the slightest bit poetic, that Mengele spent his entire life trying to control human bodies, deciding who lived and who died, who was experimented on. But after everything, Josef Mengele became the final experiment. And that is the life of the evil Josef Mengele. I mean, truly disturbing. And it's also, I don't know, I've said this before, that it seems like evil men rarely face the repercussions that are due to them. Either they create some type of amnesty deal, they broker some type of barter, or they're able to use their connections to just escape and skirt the law and skirt justice and live in, relatively free conditions. I mean, truly brutal. He strikes me as like even more evil than your average Nazi, right? Like, I've read different stories about, different levels of Nazis. There's some people that are, doing it because they believe in the ideology, but then when it comes down to actually doing it, they feel bad. And then there's other people that just, are like, I don't even want to be a part of this, but I'm doing it so I don't get exiled. And then there's certain people that are like, I love this and I love doing the Nazi work. And then there's like a level like Mengele where it's like, they're just legit psychopaths. Like if they existed in any other regime, they would just be the same thing, right? Like it seems like the Nazi ideology doesn't even matter to him. He's just a proper sociopath that wants to experiment and, torture people. And he justifies it through his own warped lens of, science or, medical data or something. I don't know. It's a different level. I can't remember who exactly it was, but there was a guy who was a Nazi officer that would talk about killing people, and he was interviewed afterwards, and basically his interview, according to psychologists, they said he matches the exact profile of a serial killer, that he would just have these sort of fits of rage, try to exert his power and control over other people, kill them, and then move on, have a cooling period, and then continue to do it over and over. And within the confines of war, you basically are doing it with impunity because it's not, serial killing. It's just part of the job. It's just evil stuff, right? Like I don't know, it's really disturbing to think about. And I think it's important to highlight some of these moments in history to really understand the brutality that human beings can do to each other, and hopes that we could, avoid these types of awful methods of torture and experimentation in the future. I mean, one can hope. Christos, you ever heard of this guy?
Haven't heard of him, but it's odd that there's a serial killer Nazi guy that has a specialization in twins.
Yeah. And I can see how he kind of rationalizes his science work, where he's like, no, I'm doing twin studies. And basically he was able to take these twins and do terrible things to one of them and not do terrible things to the other one and just observe what happens.
And also that he's mentioned as a sweet guy to these kids. But he's also a monster.
But that's like the psychopath shit. That's why I'm like, he seems more like a Ted Bundy to me. Where like Ted Bundy was like extremely charming and nice and able to seduce these women in order to get what he wants from them and then kill them. You know what I mean? Like, it seems more often than not, these kinds of guys, like these true psychopaths, can just put on whatever face they need to put on in order to get what they want. And so if he wants these kids to trust him, to be compliant, to be good subjects, to do what he ultimately tells them to do, he's like, oh, I'll just be nice to him. I'll treat him. I'll give him toys. Like, but it's just crazy to me that you can't have any, like, that's why I'm like, yeah, you're just a sociopath. You don't have the capacity to build empathy. Like, if I like high five a kid one time, I'm like, I would die for this child. You know what I mean? Like, most normal human beings, if they're like around a defenseless person, if something happens to them, you would be like, I will stop everything to make sure this doesn't happen. And this guy is the one that's perpetrating it and also still being nice to them. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's disturbing. These types of evil people walk among us, and yeah, you hope that they're not in a position where they have power to actually carry out the atrocities that they are probably thinking in their mind. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of camp. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I'm in this tent every single week, just talking about the most interesting things from all of history. This is my pursuit to understand everything that's ever happened ever. This is not the only channel we have. We also have History Camp. We have Religion Camp. Those are pretty self-explanatory. We dive into all different types of topics, specifically in the history and religion world. We also got merch, Camp R&D. You can check it out. It is in the description. And last but not least, when I'm not in this tent, I am on the road. I'm doing stand-up comedy. You can see me throughout the city. Follow me on Instagram. You can check out all the dates that I'm doing in New York City. But also, I'm on the road. You can check out all my dates there. And as always, we will be here next week. So please don't hesitate to hit that subscribe button. And we will see you all then. Thank you so much. And see you next time.